welcome back to the Legacy Radio Network. I'm your host, Dennis Tubergen. You are listening to the Everything Financial Radio Show, and I have had the pleasure once again today of talking with Mr. Jim Babka, president of the organization Downsize DC. And Jim, on your website recently, you or someone from your organization wrote this: did electing Tea Party candidates change things? You may think so after House Republicans pass a bill to repeal Obamacare, but it's what they won't do that really matters. We all know that the Senate won't agree to repeal and the president would veto, but here's what you may not realize. House Republicans already have the power to stop Obamacare dead in its tracks, even if the Senate and the president disagree. Here's how. House Republicans could attach riders to all three appropriations bills forbidding the use of federal funds to implement Obamacare. They already do this to prevent federal funding of abortion, so they could do it for Obamacare too. When I read that, that was really shocking to me. I learned something. Can you explain what you mean, and why are House Republicans not using this particular power?
Yeah, people can look up, they can Google the Hyde Amendment, H-Y-D-E. It's named for a former representative from Illinois who's now deceased. He was a pro-lifer, advanced into law the idea that the federal government could not fund abortions. And so the Hyde Amendment covered was in various appropriations bills. It covered a variety of different appropriations when they actually choose to spend them. It covered a variety of different appropriations, and it kept the federal from funding abortion. And so we're saying that exactly the same procedure could be used here, and that when these procedures are available to Congress, they rarely take them. They choose to do something that is largely symbolic and showy, something that identifies and shows you just how much they care, rather than actually doing the thing that would make the impact. People go away all excited that they took this time to, repeal Obamacare. Boy, they really do identify with us. They share our values, and miss the fact that there was a real opportunity here to stop the bill. Obamacare cannot be implemented in law. It cannot be carried out. It won't be carried out by the good graces of a bunch of volunteers trying to do something and persuading other people to do it. It's going to be done by people who are paid, working out of facilities that are paid for by taxpayers, using resources and tools paid for by taxpayers, and enforced by people with guns paid for by taxpayers who are going to make sure that everything gets done. And if you take the money away, you take all that power away. It's the key. So if the money's not appropriated, the law can't be enforced. It cannot be carried out, and it was within the House Republicans' power to zero out every bit of that if they chose. And here's the kicker. We wrote that back in June, and that has already come true. What you just read aloud has already come true. The House did, indeed, vote to repeal Obamacare. The Senate is doing nothing with the proposal, and the House has refused. Congressman Boehner himself, the Speaker, has suggested we will not do anything different than our normal appropriations plan. There is no additional plans this year to do anything further to deal with Obamacare.
So, Jim, are you suggesting, just for clarification, are you suggesting that the House Republicans had this power and they no longer have it, or are you suggesting that this is something that they could still do with some pressure?
They could still do with some pressure, but they won't. They won't. They are not going to do the tough thing here because they understand that if they did repeal this, there would be political backlash. All they wanted was the symbolism. All they wanted was the PR value. All they wanted was to make you think they're just like you. They feel the same way you do about this. So they've taken this large symbolic gesture that they can now return home to their district, and they are home in their districts in most cases this week, and they are telling their constituents, I voted to repeal Obamacare.
So sounds great politically, but from a practical standpoint, they didn't do the practical thing.
This is they do this kind of thing all the time. I'll give you another example. It happened last year. We are hearing over and over again from Republicans that we need a balanced budget amendment. Now, it takes a considerable effort to pass a balanced budget amendment. You have to have a lot of states ratify it. You have to have a supermajority of the Congress on board. And so to get a constitutional amendment is a big, big, big thing. And they keep saying we need a balanced budget amendment. It's the only thing that will keep us in place. But every year, or not every year, but every so often, we come across, and we came across it last August. We're going to come across it sometime after the election here in November. we reach a place called a debt ceiling. This is where a certain amount of money is authorized to be used for debt that the federal government can borrow to continue to outspend by over $1 trillion as it's doing right now, the amount of revenues it takes in every year. This is the amount that the debt can be expanded. And all they have to do is not raise the debt ceiling. Or they could even cut the planned increase in the debt ceiling. They could impose costs, limits on what the federal government is doing right now. You know, if all of a sudden a corporation that is dependent on one particular customer loses that customer's business overnight for whatever reason, they have to make immediate cuts no matter what their budgetary plans were going into the year. Some of those cuts might be drastic and difficult. Difficult decisions have to be made. And if Congress had done this last year, they would have had to do that as well. But they chose not to take that path. They raised the debt ceiling to everything that Obama requested and quite a bit more after putting on a symbolic showy display that they, that they cared about this issue. But they passed up the real opportunity. And they continue to talk about balanced budget proposals that will never get ratified. They will never become law, because that allows them to symbolically associate with you without actually having to do the dirty work, without having to take the political hit or cost of actually achieving their objectives.
Jim, I want to shift gears a minute because I read something on your website that Representative Ron Paul, who I guess is still officially a presidential candidate, although is not talked about much in the media anymore, has introduced a bill recently called the Free Competition in Currency Act. Your organization is definitely in favor of that, as am I. Could you explain to the listeners what this act would do?
Yeah, there's three parts to it, and I would encourage, for the details, for people to come to the website and review it. But here's basically the problem we're trying to solve. We live in a world where we have what's called a legal tender currency, and it has competitive advantages in how it's handled in tax matters compared to, say, gold and silver, how it's handled in exchange situations. And because of these advantages that have been built in by law, gold, silver, other forms of currency cannot really compete. And if you really believe that the Federal Reserve is a main driver for the economic problems that we have right now, for the fact that we have a negative interest rate setting so that you can't really get ahead by savings, for the inflation that's occurred over the years, for the unemployment that we're experiencing at this very hour, if you believe they've played a role in this, if you believe they've helped blow up the size of the federal state and led us in all these wars, if you believe those kinds of things, then you want to see the Fed go away, or at least want to see its power diminished. It would be a lot easier to make it go away if its power was diminished. And we are suggesting the best way that could happen is through competition. If gold, silver, and other forms of currency had an even playing field, the rules weren't rigged in favor of the dollar had to compete just like everything else, then the dollar would either have to get a whole lot better, or it would have to lose to the competition. And that would benefit you as a citizen, taxpayer, as a consumer more than anything else. Your ability to save, to invest, to plan your future would all be dramatically improved by that. The Free Competition Currency Act puts that kind of environment in place. It allows for that competition to occur. We think that competition is good in every other part of the market. It should exist in currency as well. There's three parts of that bill. I encourage people to go read about it. We have a very simple explanation, even probably simpler than I just did, at downsizedc.org.
Well, and certainly the idea, particularly if you're saving for retirement, that you have a currency that will tend to appreciate and buy more versus depreciate and buy less would be attractive and would certainly encourage savings versus spending, and God knows we need savers.
Right.
Let me maybe shift gears here just a minute if I could, Jim. You have recently started to talk about a deny consent movement. What is that?
Well, this is kind of a new thing that we're going to be doing, and we're gradually revealing how it's going to look, and we're even to some degree figuring this out for ourselves, but gradually explaining to our support base what it's going to look like. So it's an evolving concept. But there's a cartoon I've seen online that kind of really, to me, sums it up. And if you can picture this in your head, it's kind of hard to share a cartoon in words, but we'll try. You have a politician standing behind a podium. He's in suit and tie, he's got microphones, and he's just giving a speech like all good politicians do. And to the opposite end on the opposite end of the picture, there is a crowd of people huddled together, some of them holding up signs, listening to the speech. That's a very normal picture. There's nothing special about it until you look down at their feet. You find that the people are standing on a plank, and the plank extends out over an abyss, and at the end of that plank, over the abyss, stands the politician at his podium. And one person from the crowd has turned and walked away. All government of any kind, no matter how tyrannical, no matter how local, no matter how federal, it doesn't matter. All governments, be they, the government of your local club or civic group, all the way up to the President of the United States, rest upon the consent of the governed. If the people do not approve of what the state is doing, and they say enough, if they refuse to cooperate, if they insist that the law be changed, if they march in the streets, whatever it takes, when they say they've had enough, it ends. It's automatic. The president doesn't have any power that is plenary to his own human person. These powers come because we confer them, we give them, we support this through voting for it, and on it goes. And so we've come to believe that the key to changing everything, and this is a big dramatic shift for us, Dennis, isn't trying to persuade Congress to stop being quite so criminal. We want instead to go to the American people and point out that bad things are being done again and again every day in your name. And the politicians in Washington, when you don't speak up, assume they have your consent. They believe that they are acting in good, noble, democratic fashion, even when they're not, even when they're acting beyond the Constitution, even when they're acting beyond all sense of normal decency. They continue to engage in these behaviors because they just simply believe they have your consent, whether it's tacit or implicit or whether it's overt. Any way they can get it, they're assuming they have your blessing. And we're saying it's time to deny that. It's time to let them know we know what they're doing, we know it's wrong, we don't want to tolerate it anymore, and we're going to begin finding ways to point out the illegitimacy of their behaviors. And maybe if this is going to continue to be so systemic and is going to continue the entire institution by itself, if Congress won't read their bills, which is the primary fiduciary responsibility, limit the things to one subject at a time, abide by the limits of the Constitution, then I think Thomas Jefferson's remedy in the Declaration of Independence is the place to which we repair. We fundamentally alter or abolish this form of government.
Jim Babka from the organization Downsize DC. My time with you always goes so quickly. Why don't you go ahead and give the website one more time for those that may have just been joining us?
Yes, it's downsizedc.org. And Dennis, I'll tell you, we got some big plans. The deny consent thing is going to become a bigger and bigger theme as we go through the fall, and we've got some other things we're working on developing right now. The whole look and feel of what we're doing. In fact, even this interview felt a tad bit awkward to me today because I know where we're going here, and it's a major radical change, I think, for the better. It's a chance to have a national conversation with the American people instead of spending all our time worrying about what Washington talking heads and polls think.
Well, appreciate your time today. Everything Financial Radio on the Legacy Radio Network will return after these words. Stay with us.